Hello, romance readers. Welcome to Illicit Liaisons, where each week we talk about the good, the bad, and the naughty of romance fiction. I am Jenna Hart. I am a romance author of contemporary romance, and I have a sexy romantic mystery series. I'm also the owner and managing editor of Tender and Tempting Tales, which hosts this podcast. And through that, we publish short stories that have a little bit of spice and a lot of happily ever after.
And I'm Tara Liederman, social media manager here at Tender and Tempting Tales, and lore maven for Starship Valkyrie, a science fiction game and story universe. I write science fiction stories, including romance, and you can often find me in our anthologies alongside these two people.
And today, our guest of honor is Parrish Baker, who is a science fiction romance author writing as Urna Semper. Parrish acts as one of our editors and has two stories, one in each of our anthologies. We have Candy Air Summer and Moonlight and Margaritas, and we have Montero Sierpento Snows in Midnight Mischief and Mistletoe. And as one of our editors at Tender and Tempting Tales, he'll be heading up our second edition of our Tender and Tempting Tales easing Fantastical Foes, which will be Romantasy with an enemies to lovers trope. Can't wait to read those. Those will be 3 to 5 short stories that will be coming out in July, and we will open for submissions to those in April. Now, Parrish himself writes and posts stories in science fiction world of Iphigenia just about daily on Substack, which blows my mind. And he has stories in more than a dozen anthologies, the most recent in Uncanny Valley from Raconteur Press. He also released his most recent novel, The Pearl Crucible, at the end of last year. And we're going to have links to all of Parrish's works and all the resources that we mentioned in the show in our show notes so that you'll be able to click and go and check them out. And Parrish, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
As you all know, I love to follow bookish drama in particular, but news and things like that as well. And of course, one of the people I like to watch is Taylor Rose, who did a video recently covering different types of reviewers that are being accused of being bullies. And in some cases, they're just being terse and using strong words. Other cases, it does appear that there seems to be some discussion about who the authors are or who the reviewers are, because reviewers aren't safe from this anymore either. I've also seen some posts recently that are suggesting that readers that like certain books, that there's something wrong with them. One of them came out recently saying something about, we all know romantasy girlies are not the brightest spark. Even though that video's down, there's been a great deal of response to that one. And I've even seen some news items. You know, it just goes to show you make an oops, the internet will always remember. But another one started out with, I do not trust you little bees on Book Talk and your stupid Kindle Unlimited recommendations. That's her start, okay? So in this case, these people were attacking readers. However, they did highlight books that these readers were enjoying. So in my mind, it's sort of a backward hand negative comment toward the author, right? Like if they love this book, they're holding up the book, and these people aren't the brightest sparks or they're dumb bees. I think we can all agree that critiquing a reader for what they read is probably not a great idea. But when we're talking about book critiques, is it possible to kind of go overboard? I mean, are these reviewers being bullies when they are wording their reviews in very strong terms? I don't know. What do you think, Parrish?
Well, I mean, with like a lot of things that I think about and encounter and ponder these days, I would almost set the terms in like an entirely different way because there's kind of an internalized language that has been developed over the last 20 odd years that I first started seeing online in the late 90s. And To me, I don't feel like all of these words are being used the way they are quote unquote supposed to be used. Like they're kind of distorted. Like bullying is just kind of like a general term for now for like for conflict. Different layers of people in the generational stack are using words in different fashion. They're talking across purposes, and so we're not all making sense to each other. I do not watch much of this sort of video. I have in the last couple of days caught some of these, and I was just kind of taken aback. I was like, I can't even understand what is occurring here. The kind of the original point of criticism as a concept is, are you supposed to analyze a text and evaluate and judge it? You're separating good from bad and try to interpret it for the reader. And initially, medieval or Renaissance thing, you're like all these texts from the ancient world. It's like you're criticizing, you're breaking them down, trying to figure out what text is more valuable. And then as you got into like, a modern era of mass print entertainment, in the 19th century and up into the pre-war area, it became more and more democratized, and particularly post-war criticism is kind of like you go from, I'll call it it tends either towards a sort of banal thumbs up or a witty takedown of a book, and like in the New Yorker, it's someone who is on the bad end of that says, well, that E.H. House way treated me dirty in this review, or you were amused by it. But now, here is the 21st century, it's been so totally democratized that anybody with a laptop and a camera and a desire to do can create a good or a vicious review and try to propagate as far as they can and mean the sells, and they can slag, the book at will. And it's just sort of a coarse thing, a society thing that I think we're encountering. So when people say, "Oh, is it bullying?" I gotta kind of throw kind of everybody who's involved in it in kind of a set. Say you are all participating in this system. Because the if I'm writing filming a review of a book and I'm really sort of burning the author to the ground, and the author and the flying monkeys associated with it come back the other direction, attacking the other way, then everyone can point fingers, but there's no productive activity happening here. So I don't think it's bullying. I just think it's people getting down the mud and fighting. And I'm sure there are some people who are very upset by it. But it's an unfortunate side effect of living online. And I think that people need to be reflective that when they're on the receiving end of this kind of publicity, to a degree, as they always say, any publicity is good publicity. Although we've seen some authors who have been burned down to the ground and they have to withdraw their books. And that's a different subset of this, which is somewhat different from the rest of it, much more political.
Yeah, but you have a point. Someone goes out there and is talking like these about books,
Mhm.
particularly if they're using it to comment on the type of people who are reading them. But even if they're not, even if it really has to do with the writing, but it's really difficult. Yeah, there's always going to be a response, and the author might come back to that, and the author fans might come back to that. We've seen that. And then in the end, it's like, how does any of this help the reader? How does it
It
help me
really,
decide if I want to read this book? Because that's part of what it's about, right?
yeah,
The woman that's like, I don't trust you, bitches, on TikTok. And it's like, well, then maybe don't go there to find books to read, right?
yeah.
I've been watching these long enough to know that this person usually I like the book they pick, and this person not so much. And then, but I'm not going to go online and be like, all you people who read those books are. Anyway, Tara, what's your thoughts?
Well, as you know, I spend a lot of time on social media for my job with us and for you as well. And what I notice consistently is that the platforms reward negativity. So
Yeah.
I always blame the platforms in these situations. Because I think that one, people get noticed if they're very negative, and so that's true of the review initially, and it's true of the responses. And I think that
Mhm.
we see disproportionately the negative responses. Even though I spent so much time on social media, I was taken aback by the responses that you sent me to look at to this YouTuber because they were so nasty. I don't know. I just don't think that reading romance or reading romantasy should be so much a part of anybody's personality that they should attack somebody and make their day miserable or their life miserable. It just doesn't seem important enough to me to be so nasty in either direction, to be nasty to an author, to be nasty to a reader, to be nasty to reviewers, to be nasty as a reviewer. I just don't think any of it is worthwhile. But I think a lot of people are very terminally online. So of course that's what they do to get noticed. I mean, they're trying to get their review noticed. And I think that if you want your review, your cultural critique to get noticed these days, you do have to be phenomenally negative and abusive. Do I
Yeah.
think it's bullying?
Provocative, right?
Yeah, do I
Yeah.
think it's bullying? I think that each person doing it doesn't think that they're being a bully, but by the same token, if there's a large wave of this, a lot of people being negative to an author, or a lot of people being negative to a reviewer, or to an influencer, that collective mass can feel like bullying because it's powerful. It's like being hit by a tidal wave. Each drop of water is not a bully. It doesn't have a lot of power, but in aggregate, it absolutely does. So you always have to remember, as a content creator or a writer or reviewer online, that you could be contributing to making someone's life extremely nasty. You could even be contributing to somebody's mental health going off the cliff. That's why I'm always like thoughtful about these things. If I'm negative about somebody, even in my blog, if I'm really negative about somebody, I won't mention them by name because I don't ever want somebody to go to them and be like, "Well, T.A. Lederman said that you're a terrible writer." I don't want to do that. I
Yeah.
just
I
talk
don't
about
want
their
that
book
either.
more as a case study. And I think that that's what these reviewers should have done. But as a like escaped recovering academic, I was also taught that ad hom attacks, they don't necessarily invalidate your argument, but what they do is they distract from your argument. I mean, for instance, we're
Yeah.
talking about whether these kinds of arguments are valid, and we're not even talking about the base argument that any of these reviewers made. So the
Exactly.
critiques that they made have gotten lost because of their ad hominem attacks.
Yeah. Yeah, in the South, we have the sugar over vinegar, right? You're gonna being sweet to people is gonna they're more likely to sit and listen to you. But if you come out of the gate, offending them,
Yeah,
anything else you say afterward doesn't they're not gonna hear it.
exactly. As a writing teacher, we call it the compliment sandwich. You start
Yeah,
nice, you say something negative, you say something positive again. It's
yeah,
the bread that cushions the
yeah.
negative ham in the middle.
Exactly. I totally agree with all that. And what I find really interesting is this growing policing, I guess is the word, of what people are reading, how they're reading, what they're doing with it. And I mentioned in an email today, like, we don't see that in music or movies. Nobody's putting people down for not watching highbrow movies, but somehow we're not reading unless we're reading Wuthering Heights, which I'm convinced if Wuthering Heights was written today, speaking of something coming out soon, I would have a black cover with one of those dark academia mafia type images on it, and people would be talking about how toxic Heathcliff is,
He
right?
really is. He
But
really is. He's
because
toxic and should be canceled, Heathcliff. Let's
because
cancel
it's
Heathcliff.
written in the 19th century with a different sort of flow of the words and the language, right? Like so it's a fascinating thing to me, but let's go ahead and move on. I have wondered though, in terms of the focus a lot being on romance, and lately the things I'm watching are on romantasy. And I'm just sort of wondering, what is it? Because I mean, romantasy is a newer term, right? Like it's only a couple years old.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, it really came out of Sarah J. Maas, I believe, when she did the first A Court of Thorn and Roses. That was sort of one book, but then it became the series. And out of that sort of grew this idea of romantasy, her and other people. But I'm wondering if people have different expectations because romantasy, romantic fantasy, fantasy romance, they're different things. And I'll swear
Mm.
to God, I have a really hard time keeping which one is which. I mean, one is a romance first with fantasy elements, right? One is fantasy with a romantic subplot. And then there's the one merged together. I don't know. I'm wondering if expectations are playing a part. If people are picking up one book and finding there's not enough world building and too much spice. I don't know.
Mm.
What do you think?
Parrish and I were just discussing this actually
Yeah.
via messages
Yes.
to each other. It's funny. Go ahead, Parrish.
Well, I mean, I think you're definitely onto something there because people have expectations. And if you have a popular book or even a unpopular book and people are getting into it, they're all going to bring their expectations to it. And there's, like you say, like two, three, four different ways you go at it. A bunch of them are going to feel betrayed and said, I've wasted my time or my money or whatever on dealing with this book that is not a romance at all. It's just some kind of stupid sci-fi thing. And then the people shack up in the middle of it. And it's like, it's
Guilty as
I'm not
charged.
going to deal with this crap, So
Yeah.
they're going to go off and they're going to pound it on Goodreads, and then someone's going to get mad, and they're going to have the whole churning mess going. It's, I mean, the whole idea of of genres and tropes and things like that. I mean, they're consistent across human literary culture, but before the mid 20th century, people didn't really necessarily read things in such a granular fashion. They say, well, this is a kind of a romantic story, and well, this one's a little spicier than that one, and that one's just kind of like, just like very chaste and pure, just like to have two poles there. And you like to avoid the one and read the other. But you wouldn't get mad if somebody's reading the Idylls of the King, and you wouldn't get mad if somebody was reading, not gonna find a good example at the top of my head, but you know what I mean. It's
Yeah.
like, is there not people just accepted that these other things were out there, and you might have a judgment if someone's like reading something like that. I don't know, but you didn't have the capacity to go out and make their life a living hell for your own particular sport. And that's kind of where we are. We get so offended that somebody is enjoying something that we don't approve of, that we link it to all the other things in the universe that offend us, and they are part of a web of evil that we must defeat.
The internet creates a lot of false proximity that didn't exist before. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other part too, I mean, we talked about how these influencers in some ways are chasing views, right? So
Mhm.
sometimes that's why they are provocative. But I think the same thing in publishing, right? Like the wanting to fit your book into the thing that's selling. Like how many books
Mm.
are being labeled romantasy that aren't really? When I was agenting, I can't tell you how many books I got where the authors are trying to squeak it in as a romance because there just happened to be a romance in it, but like it
Right.
was not a romance, right? So, a lot of times as readers, maybe not understanding genre, but then those attempts by publishers or authors to be like, well, I want to get my book in front of people and sort of not recognizing like, but if you get it wrong, that's problematic too, right? If I tried to say, oh, my book is cozy, I don't want people to equate cozy with no spice, right? Because
Mhm.
my series, they are a couple who do things couples do. So those things get kind of important. So people you use them sometimes, and they use them on purpose inaccurately to kind of get in front of the buzz or the viral, but that becomes problematic. I think it's interesting because Parrish, I feel like you write in between genres or across the genres, which is sort of what I did when I did the Valentine series. They're
Mhm.
not just mystery, they're not just romance, but it's also a series. So it kind of broke rules, and you do the same thing. And so therein lies some of the challenge, right? Is
Yeah.
how do there are readers that readers are, I mean, they love so much stuff. They will go so many places with you as long as you don't misrepresent what you're doing, right? But
Right.
but how do you represent correctly and have it so if they're scrolling or whatever, oh, I like romantasy and stop, but making sure you really are romantasy, right?
Right.
I don't know. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I have to say I mean, I'm aware of the issues, if you will, and like the struggle that people face. I mean, when I first started writing, it was basically erotica, which was not quite the gritty and realistic erotica, I guess, that you can get. I mean, it's like there's like a sliding scale like, between more sensual type and more like, wow, that was a weird movie that I just saw sort of situation. It's like it goes in the band, as many things do. But
Hold up,
the
but buy now.
yes,
Yes.
that I which I'm trying to re-edit and have a new cover for that. But yes, exactly. That. But the world building was very important to me because I mean I had when I long ago writing, it was like the things that we're writing like kind of were cast in a kind of a situation not unlike what I write now, but very different. And so it's kind of like moved that whole milieu to a different region, if you will, of the whole my whole interior universe, and was writing inside of that. But since it existed, I felt very loyal to that particular viewpoint, world, situation. And so, although these things were happening in it, they could not happen in a vacuum. I mean, they kind of did in the first couple of books, but it became less and less so as it went along because I had to justify everything that was happening. It couldn't just be because, well, we're doing all this just because I'm a weird jerk and enjoy that. We're expanding on that. Why is this stuff happening? And so I began to learn more about what this world was all about and had a lot more going on than that. So I'm probably off the question by now, but the the reality of that they exist in became more important necessarily than any of the things that were occurring inside that world. The world had to be self-contained, self-organized, had to make sense. And so, although the things that I write impinge closely on romance or romantasy, I'm not fully convinced they are romances exactly. Although when that does happen, that's very, very important. And it's not an incidental part of the story. It is like, and it very important, or even occasionally like in the stories in our anthologies, a very absolutely important part of the story. It's the reason the story is happening. But anything that occurs interior to those stories, it connects outwards to other bits of reality. Like you can have, go walk down the street hypothetically and have a romance here in the real world. Yes. So I'm like snapshotting bits of their world in which that is occurring,
May
sometimes
I
more salaciously than others.
may I help as a Urna Semper stan?
Yes, you can bail me out there.
Uh, so as you know, I read just an incredible amount of Urna Semper material. I have two books sitting right next to me, actually, and beta read also for Parrish. And I actually like the world of Iphigenia, probably for the exact same reason I don't like romantasy, and I do like fantasy romance and do like science fiction romance. And I think Parrish writes sort of murder mysteries, kind of noir, kind of fantasy romance and definitely science fiction romance. And all of those things happen at the same time in Pearl Crucible, especially, which I read recently. And the reason why it's different from romantasy to me is that I feel like a romantasy is a very competent romance with fantasy as a setting, but not necessarily a fantasy story. It's not usually telling a story that only fantasy could tell. And while the tropes of fantasy might be present, they're not really facilitating the story. They're just part of the setting. And that's fine. It's a competent romance. They're great. I've read some of those. They're fun, but I often, as a fantasy reader, get frustrated because I want to know more about, the deep magic or about why the dragon is in the cave. And we often don't get those answers, or if we do, they're not as competently written as a primary fantasy author. Usually they're written a romance author who kind of just wants to get to the romance, and that's fine. There's an impatience there with fantasy that frustrates me. Urna Semper, by contrast, is very interested in the world building. Like, you will not get a story about Iphigenia or about Epsilon Eridani that is not primarily about the world, with the world as a character, or telling us something new about the world, or telling us a kind of science fiction story, or a sword and sorcery story, like those other genres that are next to the romance, they are equally as important in the storytelling. And that's something that I find very satisfying as a reader. They also have something to say, and they're utilizing fantasy and science fiction tropes to really get at that meaning, and not utilizing them to tell a romance story, which is something to say, but it's a different kind of thing to say. It's a story about love. Here is a story about power or hierarchy, or about government, or about politics, or about art. And so we'll have these sort of other attendant meanings and stories that are happening. And I really like that personally.
Yeah. I'm always amazed at these epic fantasies or epic stories. I think Game of Thrones or even Harry Potter, which I know
Mhm.
is problematic now, but when I think of the amount that had to be known from book one to get you to book seven or what, I mean, to me, it's just mind-boggling as someone who's trying to write something that has, otherworldly stuff in it
Yeah.
and trying to
Yeah.
answer those questions, but not even just answering them, but to have them be consistent through a series, right? Because all of
Yeah.
a sudden, maybe that thing's going to mess up a book down the line, but I can't just change the rules of how magic works or
Yeah.
whatever, right? Like,
Right.
so I really admire that. The other thing that I admire about you, Parrish, is how much you write, how frequently you write. I mean, you do post nearly daily on Substack, do you
Yes.
not? Yeah.
Yes. Daily. So
Really.
far,
I'm
daily
I'm
consistently. Yes.
I'm really curious, like, because my understanding is that you are sort of posting, serializing your work, and then later, you compile it and it comes out in a book. And I'm just curious, like, how you decided to do that and sort of what are the benefit? I mean, do you get feedback from readers on that, or is it just a way to keep you honest and writing every day? Like, kind of what were your thoughts
Or
around that?
probably mostly that. It is. I mean, I would do it anyway. I have not missed a day writing for, oh, going on 3 years this summer. So I mean, literally not one day for any reason.
That's like a
There's,
1,000 days, right? Like,
yes, yes.
yeah.
And the average has been about 1,000 words a day. I've had much larger days. I've had some very small days, but absolutely that much. It's kind of policing myself. I do get a certain amount of feedback, but not, enormous amounts. And it's like you get, I know people know people have looked at it. Occasionally they'll like it, occasionally they'll comment. I'm not really doing it for that. I mean, it's nice to see that it occurs. It doesn't change anything about what I do necessarily. I have one or two readers who have been very helpful. I mean, frankly, have asked questions that actually elaborate on stuff, later to try to explain what's happening. And I'm very grateful for those readers, and that's I don't necessarily live for attention like that, but it has been helpful in some bad times, that I've had in the last 3 years. So uh, I just do it because it has to be done. And Substack, I kind of found out about, and I was just sort of putting things up, and then one of those readers saying, "I'm getting confused." I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll put things up in order and line them up, and we'll just go that way." I have.
Yeah, when you get feedback, it's like, oh, somebody's looking. Because we've been talking a lot about social media and everything, and people are responding. But how many times do we put stuff out in the world, and it's like, is anybody out there?
Mhm. For
It's,
Yeah,
real.
exactly.
am I just speaking to the void? But I'm too afraid to be provocative. In terms of you just published The Pearl Crucible,
Yes.
I think the end of last year. Why don't you tell us about the book? Because that was serialized over. I mean, do you pull them
Yeah.
down when you publish them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there are some fragments lying around here and there in it that occasionally I chase down and find, but 99.9% of it is down, which makes Amazon happy because they don't like the competition with free.
Oh
Besides,
yeah.
it's like it's not edited. It's like, it's not in a complete state. So, it's if I want it to be the way it is, got to edit it, got to take it down. But how to go with that? I could talk for a couple hours on that. It
Mhm.
kind of all began when I wrote a short story for Raconteur Press. It is called "The Case of the Unnatural Sister," and the premise of the call for the book was it was like uh, women in noir detective setting. All right, and it could be however you wanted to adapt that. It could be science fictional. It could have hypothetically been fantasy, but nobody got anything in by that. It could have been, unless you count me, which I really don't. Uh, and I kind of sat down, I kind of thought about this. And the nature of the culture of the world that I live in, there are people who are like, you know, not free. They're like they're either they're clones, right, or they're citizen people who have lost their freedom to one another. But I had this image of one of these people who had run away, and she had set herself up as a private detective. And I kind of got part of that from watching Miss Scarlet and the Duke, which is like a masterpiece
Mhm.
theater thing.
Right.
And but I had this very, very visual image of who she was and what she looked like and how she acted. And then I knew at the same time that she had a personal maid and or girlfriend and who was her assistant. And I also knew that she had to have some kind of contact with their police system because you would. And so suddenly I had these three characters leap into existence. And then I had written a kind of a throwaway story that was not that great and probably would horrify some people. But there was a character in that who would be kind of like the foil against them in the story. And so it kind of wrote itself rather rapidly. And as I was nearly done with it, I said, I need to stop writing the story I'm writing, this other book, and put that book aside because I know I have a book here with her as the main character. And so that's kind of how it started. And a lot of the stuff I write, I just sort of write and things come out. I eventually had a lot of plotting and relationships I had to figure out between all of these different characters who are running around it because there's like so many red herrings and so many individuals who are like involved in this situation. And ultimately I got to the end of it. So I don't, you
So
know how
not
that
only do you have the
happens.
world you have to build, but there's the mystery, which
Yes.
that's challenging. Having written several, that's challenging too, right? Because you got
Writing a
your
mystery
clues, you
is
got your
so
herrings, you
hard.
got to figure out
Yes.
who can know what when, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's
So
really tough writing a mystery. I think it's one of the
yeah,
hardest things that I've written is like this particular book because I had to like figure out what the mystery was because it's kind of a MacGuffin situation, all right. But there's somebody had to want the MacGuffin, and then you had to have people who wanted to prevent them from having the MacGuffin. Now, why? Now, how come I don't know about this? It starts with a murder. So how does this murder fit into this? So I got to like web all these things together. It wasn't easy.
yeah,
Plus, the guy who got killed was hated by so many people that there were just millions of people who wanted to kill him, which was great.
Yes, I mean,
yeah,
everybody wanted him dead, and part of the resolution was that really nobody cared to actually find what you would call justice. It was mostly tidying up loose ends because politically and socially, I mean, you got to like get retribution for him being killed because he's like from the top layer of society, but you didn't really need to go overboard because nobody gave a crap. So like they had to find balance and who they punished and how they punished to get out of the book and killing a bunch of other people. So it was on the agenda. So it was kind of difficult.
Mhm. Wow.
What's the real thrust of the book to me is not really justice for the person who's gotten killed. It's actually in the end justice for the main character. That's what's
Yeah.
important to the end. And then
Yes.
the thing the book does that I really like, this is the thing Jim Butcher does as well, is what I call guns on the table, where like as Dardana gets deeper into this, more guns mount up on the table. More and more people are after her. More and more things are endangering her, and she's running from like this greater and greater danger and getting like sucked down into this pit where she has fewer and fewer options. And it's very suspenseful that way. Like she is running out of options, running out of allies, and running out like just running out of friends to some degree, but also making new ones. And it's this really great tangled web. So at a certain point, the mystery is less who killed this guy and how is Dardana gonna get out of this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you like what led you to write science fiction romance. I don't find
Ah,
a lot of other science fiction romance friends out there, so I wanted to know how that ended up happening to you.
well, I mean, I referenced a few minutes ago, like uh, I used to write like in college and after that, and one of the reasons I stopped is I couldn't ever finish a book, couldn't ever finish a story. Ending was like not possible. It was like you get to about a third to two-thirds of the way through and you just throw up your hands because it's all garbage and why am I doing this sort of thing. So, but the I had read it's an author named Richard Grant, who I recommend. He write particularly a book called Rumors of Spring, and his stories were set, several hundred years in the future, and it was like after political, economic, and environmental catastrophes and changes. It wasn't necessarily a really very dystopian world. It was not unlike mine, quite frankly. It was like very orderly, it was somewhat broken down, and kind of a different take on nearly everything that went on. And so I kind of like transferred some of that, I think they call it vibe these days, vibe to a kind of a similar situation, tried to like write stuff like that. And there were a couple of characters who are not utterly dissimilar to the Jordana and Bersina in that book, but totally different. They weren't solving a mystery. They were just honestly, it was a little bit more Moonlight and Margarita sort of situation. It was like just a different kind of relationship between the two of them in that story in Candy Summer. Uh, but that all went away, but it was all kind of sitting in the back of my head. And so as I started writing that world, I mean, it was a conscious decision as I can resurrect this vibe, but I'm going to, instead of having it in the future here on Earth, I'm going to have it way in the future and out in space where I don't have to worry about anything going on here, any historical continuity. These people are taken out, separated, sent 11 light years away, and dumped there. And then we're going to run the clock ahead a few hundred years.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started justifying and trying to figure out why it all worked. And so the one of the constants is, obviously love comes up quite frequently in the human experience. And so since I was interested in that, and since I had this bizarre society that was demanding to be investigated, obviously it would be kind of a romantic milieu, even though it wouldn't necessarily fit what we would do around here in the 21st century. So,
Yeah, you have like a romance author's perspective on like
mhm.
writing romance, which is different from like when I read the big dystopias, a lot of them have this kind of cynical perspective on love, you know. A lot of them have
Mhm.
failed or unsatisfying love stories, you know. Even Katniss's love story, right, feels kind of unsatisfying, right, when you read The Hunger
Right.
Games, and that's young
Mhm.
adult. Or you read 1984 or you read Brave New World, and these are failed love stories in them, even though they're
So,
really important.
yes.
Yeah, they're
Mhm.
utterly failed, but you don't do that. I mean, there's an idealism in your romance writing.
Yeah. I want the people in the books to have a future. I want them to have hope because, you know, except in like utterly bleak places like 1984 in North Korea, you're going to end up with some level of hope. And this isn't a terribly bleak place in that sense. It's got its own problems, but they don't. Nobody there necessarily perceives their society being an irredeemable one. It is the world that exists.
Mhm.
And so they intend to live their lives and be happy. And so since I'm writing about people falling in love or whatnot, I want to create satisfying relationships for them and to send them on their way into the future happy. I don't want to have them suffer. I mean, people end up suffering in the books, but people end up suffering in real life also.
But they still find happiness in each other. Yeah,
Yes,
I like
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
All right, so let me ask my other questions. Do you have any hot takes about romance tropes? Like, have you ever consciously used one? I see them in your stories, and like, which one do you really hate to read or watch?
Well, that's a good question too, and I don't have, speaking of satisfying, a very satisfying answer for it. The tropes reveal themselves as the story comes out, like in oh, we have so many M's in our names. Moonlight, follow
Or
up.
margaritas.
Oh, the other one, Midnight Mischief and Mistletoe.
Man,
You're
I'm
looking
Okay,
at
glad
your
I'm not
shelf,
the
aren't you?
only one that gets those confused.
it is not you alone. It is a occupational hazard, I
It
swear.
is.
All right, so we have Montero Pinto snows, and so I had a kind of an idea because it was like it's got to be winter, got to be Christmas. Well, they don't do Christmas, but I do know what they do. They do Festivalo, which is see, here's the world building. Their planet is closer to the primary than ours, and therefore it goes around
Faster.
faster, right? So the year is shorter, although their days are an hour longer. You know,
Mm.
about a 25-hour day instead of a 24-hour day. Which is why if you ever read about the clock striking 25, that I'm not making a mistake. That is
Mm.
indeed there are 25 hours in a day.
They're like Mars.
So, you're right. So they have I figured out the calendar and I figured out that at the end of the year, there's like a 3 day period, which is non-calendrical. It's outside the calendar. That's they call it Festivalo. And then once every few years, they got to toss in a fourth day, and it's like an extra long holiday. All right. So our girl is. I envisioned her going out to the country during this to a relative's country estate. Okay, well, this is sort of a Bridgerton whatnot. So we're going to go out to the country. Yada yada. Here's the estate. Yada yada. I said, I don't want to. I don't want to mess around with that. What if she didn't make it? Why wouldn't she make it? And so then that focuses on the fact that she didn't. So the romance has to happen with whoever was driving her because she didn't know how to drive. I mean, it's not Saudi Arabia or anything, but women are not big on driving in this society. It's like it's not a thing. So she's got to have a driver. She's upper class, so not terribly upper class. She's got a driver and she has total expectation will take care of her. And then she's also got a new maid for reasons, and she has total expectations. This girl's going to take care of her also. All she's got to do is just suffer through this, get to the country, and have a decent time. Well, we're in the middle of nowhere now. So obviously, not obviously, but since there is a third person there who's the man that the orientation of letting have the romance with him. So I got to figure out who he is. And so I don't necessarily know what on earth that trope is, but it's a thing and it happened. And so the thing that you would call a trope evolved out of the situation. And I didn't really label it at the time, although had to try to label it later. I'm still not satisfied with any answer I've come up with.
Forced proximity.
Forced proximity. Yeah, that's the thing. Forced proximity.
Yeah.
So, see, you can tell how terrible I am at this. But I fall into these things.
Yeah.
So I understand why people, enjoy the tropes. They rely on a source of a thing that they like. Okay. They say, well, I want to read about all of these people and all of these similar situations so I can have the same high each time when I get to she had that secret unknown baby. I love it. I'm living for this thing. He doesn't know anything about it. It's going to make my day. Bingo.
Oh, no.
Perfect.
Not that.
But I don't myself. I'm like I'm not approaching it that way. I mean, I cannot off the top of my head imagine a story that would write like that, but I wouldn't rule it out because it would just happen organically.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So I write organic tropes, I guess, chemical free, and they just
Chemical
show
free,
up.
preservative free tropes. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Raised
I
on
have this
non
theory that most authors come up with story first, maybe character or story first.
Mm-hmm.
And then as they're plotting or they're writing, the tropes become obvious, but it's based on the story. It's like I've got two people and they're doing this. Oh, well, that's that trope. And now they're going to do this. Oh, that's that trope.
Yeah.
Even without thinking of the trope in advance. Yeah.
When I teach genre to my students, I often tell them the tropes live in you. We have these stories in us already. Like they're part of the culture. The culture lives in you, and therefore the tropes live in you, and they're going to come out of you, whether you intend to write them or not.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think only once I've written to a trope, and I wanted to pay homage to Persuasion. Obviously, that's a second chance. And I think the rest of the times it was just sort of like, let's write. And sometimes on the back end, trying to figure out
What
Like,
have I done here?
what's the best trope for this? Because, again, marketing, right? Like
Yes.
Yeah.
readers want to know, they look for certain things or they avoid certain things. And so, yeah, you have to kind of figure that out. You are going to be editing Fantastical Foes coming up
Hmm.
here. Is there anything specific you're looking for any writers or any readers who want to become a writer? And might want to submit. These stories will be 7,000 words or less, have to be some sort of fantasy, fantastical thing with enemies to
Hmm.
lovers. Speaking of tropes, is there anything you're
Hmm.
looking for, Parrish?
Well, you can tell I'm not long-winded or anything. Like I say, in a short story, particularly, I mean, I guess 7,000 is not that short, but from my perspective, it's kind of short. So it's not a big territory. There's not a lot of space for like clear world building, which if fantasy, of course, lends itself to this situation. It's like, oh, we got the whole dynastic thing, we got the king, we got that, we got the dragon, there's all these things, and then in the meantime, we got to like somehow shoehorn in this romance. So what I kind of like to see, and don't necessarily hold me to this because I want to see good writing in any particular way. If you bring something in and I say, absolutely, that's good. But this is kind of my concept. What I would like people to like do is instead of trying to like absolutely write out all the aspects of the High Elven Kingdom. I just want something evoked. I want to have the impression of larger things that are happening. Because you don't have the space to like do all of these things and have a full-fledged romance in a very compact space like that. So I'd like sort of evoking something instead of like info dumping. Info dumps are not, you just won't have the space for it. I mean, it just won't work. I'd like another thing I'd like, it kind of goes back to the language thing we were talking. I like consistency in language as long as it makes sense. I want to, when you have your characters, I want them to be like communicating, if not on the same social level, at least on the same cultural level. They're coming from the same universe. Now, if somebody's like, been isekai'd out of our world or something into that, that's a different situation. But they should be consistent in themselves. If I've got like a barista dumped in, from Earth, and I have a knight, they need to the relationship in communication between the two should be informed by this. I mean, it shouldn't be like thou and thee and this, and then she's like, say, what do you want in your latte? And nobody notices this thing. It's like this is obviously Gus has to somehow become part of their situation, trying to relate and trying to talk to each other. And that said, I'm not really huge fan of what I would call contemporary language in that kind of a situation. I don't want people like talking, like they're Valley Girls, for instance, or something in a high elven kingdom with absolutely no excuse for this whatsoever. You need to like modulate the language to the scenario. But again, that said, there is plenty of just fantasy out there that is, contemporary or magic realism fantasy that it exists for a reason. It's like that for a reason. If it's consistent and if it's understandable being there, yes, I will be interested in that. I mean, there's a lot of we've already gone over kind of like the negative talk about romantasy. I don't obviously since I'm editing this, I don't worry about that aspect of. I mean, if the society is retrograde, and I'm looking at myself here, it's got a reason for it, and we're having the story inside of it, and I'm not trying to like create Berkeley 1968 in a ancient high elven or whatever kingdom here, or dwarves or what have you. I'm not expecting that. No one should be expecting that, and if they are, then they shouldn't be reading it because it's not for them. As long as you're
Entertainment and
not,
escapism. Yeah.
yeah, if you're not, it's totally if you're not hurting somebody then and you're enjoying it, knock yourself out. I mean, the happiness of the people inside the story is important. That
Your
And
talk
remember,
about language made me think of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. They would go to different times and they were talking the way they talk, and they went and saw Socrates. They brought Socrates back with them.
oh,
so
great.
great back with them. It
They kept calling
certainly
him
did.
Socrates, remember? And they
Hmm.
introduced Socrates to Napoleon, and I mean, that was a brilliant movie, I thought.
That was a good movie, and
Yeah,
it worked. It worked because with the comedy of it,
yeah,
everybody worked together, and it was fantastic.
yeah, yeah,
Also remember that the zine is enemies to lovers, right? So that's you got to do some work to bring them on a journey from enemies to lovers, and that's going to be difficult to do in 7,000 words. And
yeah.
Exactly.
you got to do that
It'll be
So you have to
fun.
believably.
economize,
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely economize.
yeah,
I think that's a
yeah,
difficult trope. So this is quite a challenge. I think it's a good challenge, but it's a difficult trope to write, I think.
yeah. Well, we're going to have to wrap up here pretty quickly, but we like to always ask our guests, and what are they reading now, or a book that you would recommend, particularly related to
Okay.
maybe what you write.
Let's see here. I have a couple of things set up here. Gosh, let's recommend three things. Just
Okay.
three things. All right. First, I will
Oh,
never miss an opportunity to
yes.
evangelize this
I was
book.
waiting for that.
Mhm.
Read this book. This is, in my ill-informed opinion, I think this is the best romance ever. This is fantastic. This is Some people have been critical of this book because it seems to sort of potter along, and that she doesn't seem to have a lot of agency. She has enormous agency. You just don't understand. She is the entire reason the book happens. Fantastic book. Tamith Lee, great author. A Heron of the World, great book. Totally recommend. Uh, this will make no particular sense, but this is the book. This is a Greek romantic novel, and I'm not talking modern Greek. I'm talking like 100 AD Greek. This is, let me get the name straight here. I read this recently. Cleitophon and Leucippe. All right. And it's kind of a picaresque novel, and Leucippe is, but it's totally romance from ancient Greece. And it's different than something would write today, but it's fascinating to see the connections in general approach to what they did 1900 years ago to what, we do today. So I recommend that. And then off of the romance beat, and this kind of goes, yeah, this is in a very little known book, but it is called South Wind. It's by Norman Douglas. It happens on an Italian island, a fictional Italian island, and it's again not much seems to happen, but there's a murder which is you can see coming from the beginning of the book on. You know this is coming. There are a bunch of refugees from Bolshevik Russia in a cult. There's islanders. There's history for the island. It is really an amazing book. It's naturally enough printed by Dover, which prints all the kinds of weirdo books that exist in the world, and I highly recommend this also. So there you go. Three recommendations for you.
Those are great.
Awesome.
Tara, are you reading anything new now?
And anything new?
Or have a
I have picked up
recommendation?
your first Valentine book for research purposes.
That old
Research
thing, that
purposes.
old thing. It's
My
always,
job.
I wonder if every author has this, the books that came out 15 years ago or whatever. Like, oh, I
Yeah.
write so much better today. Really
Uh,
want to rewrite that thing. You know?
yes. I'm doing that right now myself. So
I can just see Tara like, why is she uses so many dialogue tags
Oh
and
yeah, I'm gonna
she's
come for you. I'm gonna be
always
like, you told
saying,
me
don't
not to
use,
do X, Y, and Z, and you're using it all
and
over the
I,
place.
yeah, broke all the rules.
there's a prologue in this thing.
Yeah, it's before I had an agent who told me what to
Mm.
do.
History of the World in 6 classes. This is a nonfiction.
Mm.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I finished Chasing Shelter, which was what I mentioned last week that I read, and of course I finished Offer of a Gentleman because Bridgerton is starting here. And then I
Mm.
looked at my brand new bookshelves I got for Christmas of where I have a bazillion books and just like I don't even know what to read, but I thought, okay,
Mm.
we're talking a little bit romantasy sci-fi today. So, I'm going through looking at those and I picked one, which right now I can't remember the name of, but it's a new book. And I started reading it and I was like, no, I'm not feeling it. And then I realized I found this one on my shelf and I picked it up. It is called That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon
Yes,
What an
by
isekai name.
by by Kimberly
totally.
Fleming, who's a BIPOC author. And of course, if you, for those of you watching video, you can look at the cover
Excellent.
and see, we got our demon and we got
Mhm.
what's really interesting is it is a rom-com. Like it is written, and her name is Cinnamon and Cinnamon Hot Pepper. and she lives on a cinnamon farm with her family, her brother Cumin, her brother
Of course.
Chili. I mean, it's just sort of silly, right?
Very cozy.
Right.
Sort of like Hunger Games. Every 15 years, people from each kingdom have to go help this queen ward off the demons from coming in and get them. And
Wait, it's cozy Hunger Games?
it's not
No.
cozy. It
Yes.
What
is
is
not
going on?
cozy. Did I say cozy?
No,
I
no, no.
don't think I
The
did.
name sounded cozy to me, so it sounds
I
like a
know, and
cozy
it
Hunger
looked
Games.
no cozy. Like, I think the last thing on the back when you read the blurb says, on the bright side, at least he keeps burning off his shirt. So, like, I think he's shirtless quite a bit. Like, well,
Yes.
here it looks, in the, anyways. So I'm only a couple chapters in. I started reading last night, but it's a good giggle, for what it is. And I've decided, because there's a demon and there's a map of another world. In my mind, if there's a
Ooh.
map of another world, that screams fantasy, right?
Yep,
Oh
map.
yeah.
Yep. Yes,
Oh
So
most
yeah.
important thing is a map.
so I'm like, okay, so that's what I'm reading now. Anyway, I thank you, Parrish, so much for chatting with us today. And I want to remind everybody that all the books that we've talked about, or things that we've talked about, we will have links in the show notes. I also want to ask people, wherever you're hearing or watching this, click and follow and subscribe and do all that fun stuff as well. Tara, go ahead and lead us out.
All right. Well, we are Tender and Tempting Tales. We have calls for submission going all this year. If you are a writer, just remember that we've got our zines coming out, also our anthologies. We'll have calls for submission in April, in May, in August, and we'll be having our anthologies coming out this year as well. You can also find us on Substack. That's Tender and Tempting Tales. We've got weekly articles about reading romance and about romance tropes. And we also have a reading challenge coming out this month that you can check out there. You can also follow us on Instagram, Tender and Tempting Tales, as well as our Tender and Tempting Tales reader group on Facebook. And thank you so much for joining us.
And until next time, peace, love, and happily ever after.